There are some stories that do not fade with time. They grow darker, they grow stranger, and the more people try to close the case, the more the unanswered questions seem to multiply. The death of Jeffrey Epstein inside a federal jail cell in New York became one of those stories almost instantly, not only because of who he was, not only because of the wealth, power, and scandal surrounding him, but because the circumstances of his final hours felt so chaotic, so improbable, and so deeply compromised that millions of people around the world refused to accept that the official version, by itself, could ever fully explain what happened. This was not an ordinary prisoner. This was a man tied to a network of influence, money, abuse allegations, elite connections, sealed documents, and unanswered accusations that touched some of the most sensitive corners of power. By the time he died in August 2019, the public was no longer looking at Jeffrey Epstein as just another criminal defendant. He had become the center of a storm, a symbol of corruption at the highest levels, and a man many believed knew too much. So when news broke that he had been found dead in his cell, the reaction was immediate. People did not just ask how he died, they asked what happened in those last hours, who failed, who was missing, what was not recorded, and whether the truth had been buried the moment his life ended. Before we go any further, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and support the project if you want more serious investigations into mysteries, conspiracies, and unanswered cases that still disturb the public imagination. And I want you to comment below with your opinion before the end of the video. Do you believe Jeffrey Epstein's death was the result of catastrophic negligence? Or do you think the pattern of failures points to something far more intentional? Stay with me, because the timeline of those final hours is exactly where this case becomes impossible to ignore. To understand why the last hours matter so much, we need to understand the pressure surrounding Epstein in the days before his death. He had been arrested in July 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges, and the case immediately sent shockwaves through the media and political world. The reason was simple. This time, it looked different from the earlier scandals. This time, there was a real possibility of a full federal prosecution, deeper scrutiny of his social network, and potentially devastating consequences for people who had once moved in the same circles around him. He was no longer just a disgraced financier facing allegations. He was a potential source of explosive information. Then came one of the most important and most controversial details in the case. In late July, Epstein was found injured in his cell with marks on his neck. The exact meaning of that incident immediately became disputed. Some accounts suggested a suicide attempt. Others raised the possibility of an assault. That moment changed everything, because it placed him under closer attention and intensified fears about his safety, his mental state, and the possibility that he might not survive long enough to face trial. For the public, it was the first sign that whatever was happening inside that jail was already far from normal. After that incident, Epstein was placed on suicide watch, but not for long. He was later removed from it and returned to conditions that, at least in theory, required regular monitoring. That decision would later become one of the most heavily criticized parts of the timeline. Why was a high-profile prisoner, already at the center of an earlier cell incident, no longer under the highest level of observation? Why did the system relax around one of the most sensitive detainees in the country? And why, in a facility responsible for holding some of the most important federal inmates, did multiple safeguards appear to collapse at the exact moment they were needed most? By the evening of August 9th and the early morning of August 10th, the case entered the window that would define everything that followed. Epstein was housed in the special housing unit of the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Reports later showed that he was supposed to be checked regularly. Instead, some of the officers assigned to monitor the area failed to carry out those checks properly. According to subsequent legal proceedings and public reporting, records were falsified, rounds were not completed as required, and crucial hours passed without the level of supervision the situation demanded. In a normal case, that would already be a scandal. In this case, it became gasoline poured onto a fire that was already out of control. Another detail only made things worse. Epstein was reportedly alone in his cell that night after his cellmate had been moved out. That fact immediately became central to public suspicion. Whether one believes the official ruling or not, the image was devastating. One of the most closely watched inmates in America, linked to some of the most powerful people in the world, left without the expected level of oversight during the final hours of his life. For critics, that was not just negligence. It was negligence so severe that it looked almost impossible to separate from intent. And then came the morning of August 10th. Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell. Emergency measures followed, but he was later pronounced dead. The official cause of death was ruled suicide by hanging. That ruling, instead of closing the case, opened a much larger public rebellion against the idea that the story was settled, because by that point, people were no longer looking at the conclusion in isolation. They were looking at the entire environment around it. The earlier neck injuries, the removal from suicide watch, the missed checks, the exhausted staff, the falsified records, the surveillance issues, and the extraordinary stakes surrounding the man at the center of it all. This is exactly why the last hours became so important, not because they offered clarity, but because they seemed to produce the opposite. Every detail that emerged appeared to weaken confidence in the system. Reports described severe staffing shortages, overworked guards, and a jail operating under deep strain. There were also questions about surveillance footage. Some cameras did not provide the kind of clean, decisive answer the public expected. Technical problems and incomplete coverage only widened the distrust. In an ordinary scandal, bureaucratic failure might explain confusion, but in a case as charged as this one, confusion became evidence, at least in the minds of millions, that something much larger had gone wrong, and that is where the case split into two powerful narratives that still exist today. The first is the official interpretation, Jeffrey Epstein facing the collapse of his life, the certainty of public disgrace, the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison, and mounting legal pressure, took his own life inside a jail that failed to protect him. Under this view, the real scandal is not murder or conspiracy, but a catastrophic chain of negligence, incompetence, and institutional breakdown. A broken system allowed one of the most important prisoners in America to die. The second narrative is the one that refuses to disappear. It argues that the failures were simply too convenient, too concentrated, and too damaging to be viewed as ordinary incompetence. According to this theory, the missing checks, the broken procedures, the surveillance issues, the earlier warning signs, and the extraordinary importance of the prisoner all combine into a pattern that feels almost designed rather than accidental. This is the reason the case still provokes such intense reactions. It is not just that people doubt the official story, it is that many believe the environment surrounding the death was so compromised that certainty itself became impossible. To stay serious, we need to be careful here. There is a major difference between suspicion and proof. Public doubt does not automatically establish foul play. A pattern that looks unbelievable is not the same thing as evidence of homicide. In high-profile cases, especially those involving wealth, abuse, and elite networks, the human mind naturally searches for a hidden hand behind every failure. Sometimes that instinct reveals real corruption. Other times it grows strongest precisely because the truth is more banal and more disturbing. Institutions that were supposed to function simply did not. That possibility, in its own way, is almost as chilling as conspiracy. But there are reasons this case feels different from ordinary institutional failure. Jeffrey Epstein's importance did not come from celebrity alone. It came from what he represented. He was seen by the public as a node in a larger network, someone who might hold information capable of embarrassing or implicating powerful figures. Whether that belief was exaggerated or not, it shaped the public reaction completely. When a man widely believed to possess dangerous secrets dies before trial under bizarre conditions, the event does not enter history as a simple prison death. It enters history as a permanent suspicion. The final hours also matter because of what they took away. A trial never happened. Full testimony never happened. Cross-examination never happened. The public never got to see how far the case might have reached, what evidence might have surfaced, or what names might have been drawn deeper into scrutiny. That absence created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, suspicion grew. The last hours are not haunting only because of what happened inside the cell. They are haunting because they became the boundary line between what the world might have learned and what it may never know. Even small details took on enormous symbolic weight. The fact that jail procedures reportedly failed at multiple points. The fact that documentation became part of the scandal. The fact that his prior incident in custody had already raised alarms. The fact that such a high-profile detainee was not under a tighter, unmistakable regime of protection. Each detail added another layer to the feeling that this was not merely tragic, it was unacceptable. And when a case becomes unacceptable in the public mind, people stop asking only what is proven. They begin asking what is plausible, who benefited, and why so many safeguards disappeared at once. There is also a deeper reason why the story continues to grip audiences years later. The Epstein case touched a nerve far beyond crime reporting. It collided with public distrust of wealth, government, media, and institutions that appear one way in public and another way behind closed doors. For many people, his death became a symbol of a system that protects itself, loses key evidence, breaks at critical moments, and then asks the public to accept that the matter is finished. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, it is a major reason the final hours still generate documentaries, investigations, debates, and endless speculation. So what happened in Jeffrey Epstein's last hours before his death? The most responsible answer is this. According to the official record, he died by suicide inside a jail where multiple failures, staffing problems, monitoring breakdowns, and procedural lapses created the conditions for that death to occur. But the reason the case never truly settled is that those failures were so serious, so numerous, and so badly timed that they destroyed public confidence. In the eyes of millions, the final hours did not clarify the truth. They buried it under layers of doubt. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of the entire story. Not only that Jeffrey Epstein died before trial, but that the circumstances of his death made certainty itself feel contaminated. In some cases, the official answer may be unsatisfying but still stable. In this case, the official answer exists alongside a permanent shadow. That shadow is made of missing confidence, broken procedures, damaged credibility, and the fear that the most important part of the story died with the man at the center of it. In the end, the mystery of Jeffrey Epstein's last hours remains powerful because it sits at the intersection of fact, failure, and suspicion. The facts tell us there was a death in custody. The failures tell us that the system did not do what it was supposed to do. And the suspicion tells us that for a huge portion of the public, the case will never feel complete. Whether one sees the event as suicide enabled by extraordinary negligence or as something darker hidden behind institutional collapse, the same conclusion remains. Those last hours changed the meaning of the case forever. Now I want to hear your view. Do you believe Jeffrey Epstein's death was the result of a broken prison system and catastrophic incompetence? Or do you think the pattern of irregularities points to a deliberate cover-up? Leave your opinion in the comments, because this is one of those cases where the public still refuses to stop asking questions. And if you want more serious content about mysteries, conspiracies, and the cases the world still cannot fully explain, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to support the project. Because sometimes the biggest mystery is not what happened in public, but what happened in the final hours no one was supposed to fully understand.